afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Sierra Lamonaco and I am the Alumni Relations Officer with the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering and the Program Lead for the Skule Lunch Learn. I would like to thank all of you for joining us here today for our last Skule Lunch Learn event only of the 2024 year. Now, with alumni tuning in from all over the world, we have guests joining us from 4 different countries, including Canada, Jamaica, Malaysia, and the United States. Now, before we start today's presentation, I wish to acknowledge the land in which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississauga of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are so grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Now, I hope today everyone is so excited for the presentation as our guest speaker is at the forefront of sustainable innovation through precision fermentation. It is this technology reshaping how we produce essential ingredients. Dr. Pratish Gawand works closely and his work aligns very closely with U of T Defies Gravity campaign, particularly in creating sustainable futures and driving scientific discovery. As a CEO of Ardra Inc, he's advancing biotechnology to engineer sustainable alternatives, transforming industries while reducing the ecological impact of traditional production methods. Now today, we have the distinct pleasure of welcoming someone truly remarkable who is stepping in for Lori Hevola, the chair and MC of the Skule Lunch Learn program. Our guest is not just a proud double graduate of U of T Engineering Chemical Engineering program, ChemE 1994, and of course a master's in 1998, but she also serves as the Director of Alumni Relations in the Office of Advancement. She's truly one of the cornerstones, or perhaps more fittingly, the heartbeat of our engineering community. She embodies the spirit of connection and leadership that makes this group so incredibly special. And with that, please join me in welcoming Sonia DeBulio, who will now introduce our speaker for today's event.
Thank you so much, Sierra, for that kind and warm introduction. It's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to you all and to Dr. Pratish Gawand, our distinguished guest speaker for today's session. Dr. Gawand is the co-founder of Ardra Inc, which uses fermentation to sustainably and ethically generate ingredients. Food, perfumery, and cosmetic formulators can use their natural ingredients at a stable price point, reliable supply and consistent quality, independent of seasonal variation, climate change, geopolitical disputes, or natural disasters. He started the company as a spin-off from his work at the University of Toronto. He has over 10 years' experience in the bioprocessing industry. He raised seed financing for the company and was also responsible for bringing in initial revenues for the company and closing strategic partnerships. Pratish obtained his PhD in chemical engineering at the University of Toronto. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Pratish Gawand.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Sierra, for that great introduction. It's my pleasure to be here and share some of my thoughts on precision fermentation. Today, my objective is to give a brief introduction to this technology called precision fermentation and the promise it holds to change our food industry. And I also want to discuss some of the aspects that go into commercialization of precision fermentation for all the entrepreneurs there that are considering to make ingredients using this technology. So I will start first with the challenges that we are facing in the food industry. The food industry has been under scrutiny for the last few years, mainly because of the heavy environmental impact. And more importantly, the fact that the way we produce our food today may not be sustainable for the growing population and the changing food habits in the developing countries. Food industry is responsible for over 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. They are highly resource intensive. They use 70% of fresh water in agriculture, use 50% of land that is used for agriculture, making actually feed that is used to grow farm animals. and it is also is also a cause for heavy deforestation. A lot of ingredients in the food industry are also unsustainably produced. The best example for this is perhaps palm oil, which is a $65 billion ingredient. The market size is 65 billion, and it's found in over 50% of all the products in the supermarket in North America. It is unsustainably produced. Palm oil plantation has severe effect on some of the most delicate ecosystems, and excessive plantation has pushed to some animals to brink of even extinction. A lot of ingredients that are produced from natural raw materials such as fruits or flowers, they tend to have supply related issues. These ingredients are not produced in very large quantities in nature, so getting these raw materials can be very unsustainable. One example I give for this is that of rose oil. To make 5 ml of rose oil, of a teaspoon of rose oil, one needs to use 250,000 rose petals, 250,000 rose petals to just make 5 ml of rose oil. So that's a very unsustainable way of producing high value ingredients. These ingredients also tend to have high production costs because they are produced in such low quantities in nature. And many of the ingredient production is also related or also associated with unethical production, a lot of violation of labor laws, and even child labor. So the overall point I'm trying to make here today is that natural food ingredients, as we see them, may not necessarily be better for environment, and we need to find better ways of how we produce and consume food today. So precision fermentation is an upcoming technology and holds a promise of solving some of the problems in the food industry. Fermentation has been used in the food industry for generations, I would say. Traditional fermentation involves fermentation processes like making yogurt from milk or making wine or beer, tempeh from soy. These are all traditional fermentation processes. There are also fermentation processes where we can produce just biomass that can be consumed directly as a protein source. And that's known as biomass fermentation. But precision fermentation is slightly different in the sense that in precision fermentation, we use engineered microbes, genetically modified microbes as cell factories to produce specific functional ingredients. Precision fermentation also is not new to the food industry. It has been used for decades, and quite a few ingredients are made using precision fermentation. The best example is monosodium glutamate or rennet enzymes that use in cheese making. A lot of flavors are made using precision fermentation. Vitamins are made using precision fermentation. But recently, precision fermentation got a lot of interest because it was shown to it was used to make products of animal origin more sustainably than actually producing these ingredients from animals. And these ingredients typically are proteins like milk proteins, egg proteins, gelatin, collagen. All these ingredients that are animal derived can be more sustainably produced using precision fermentation. But I do want to mention that precision fermentation is not just limited to protein production and can be used to make non-protein chemical ingredients, which is what we focus on at Ardra. Precision fermentation is an important technology because it has a promise to produce food more sustainably. It can just because it involves innovation around engineering microbes and has ability to make novel ingredients. It can be used to make ingredients that make food taste better. It can make food more healthier. It can make ingredients that can make food more healthier. And it can solve some of the problems in the supply chain of food ingredients, such as more stably produced ingredients, more locally and more scalably produced ingredients. And that is exactly what we do at Ardra. We use precision fermentation to make novel food ingredients. Our focus is on making ingredients that are either difficult to source, not very easily available in the market. We also focus on ingredients that are not very sustainably produced, or ingredients that are not at all available in the market, completely novel ingredients to improve our foods, the health profile of foods, the nutritional profile of food, as well as taste of foods. At Ardra, we do not focus on making proteins using precision fermentation. So that's a topic I'm not going to talk about today. So with that, I wanted to mention some of the major steps that are used in precision fermentation, and any good precision fermentation company has expertise in developing these steps. Because we focus on making chemical ingredients or non-protein ingredients using precision fermentation, the first step involved is that of a pathway design. And what that means is, once we select an ingredient to make using precision fermentation, we come up with a pathway to make this ingredient. It's very similar to how a chemist would come up with a scheme of synthesizing a chemical. Just the constraint is that we have to use reactions that can be carried out in a biochemical or biological way. Now, pathway design can be done rationally. There are softwares that are available to design pathways, and these pathways can be basically a combination. It could be a combination of both, or one could even rely on natural pathways that are present in nature. Like if one wants to make a flavor ingredient like vanillin, one could borrow pathway from vanilla plant and transport into an industrial host microbe to make vanillin fermentation. So there are different ways of getting a pathway to make ingredients. And once the pathway has been identified, the next step is to do enzyme screening. So for every single step of the pathway, we need to find an enzyme or a biocatalyst that can catalyze that particular step. And this is, again, a process that has been fairly established in the industry. A lot of companies also use a high throughput automation to screen enzymes. It can either involve screening enzymes that are already present in nature, or it can also involve engineering proteins to get the specific catalytic activity that is desired from enzymes. So that's the next step, to screen enzyme for every single step that is needed for the pathway. And the third step is involves strain engineering. So once the pathway has been established, the pathway can be introduced into an industrial microbial host strain, and then the microbial strain can be further engineered to make sure that it produces the precursors that are needed to make the specific ingredients. And this, again, is the most crucial step, and it involves heavy metabolic and genetic engineering of host strains to efficiently produce the target ingredients. Once we have a strain that can produce the desired ingredient, we can focus on then developing bioprocess or fermentation process to produce ingredient using our engineered strain. And finally, we have to take into account how to purify the produced ingredient from the fermentation broth. I must mention that it sounds like these are linear steps in developing a process for precision fermentation, but typically, it does not happen in a linear fashion because biology is sometimes intractable. We do not get desired results despite a lot of design. So we have to build strains, test them, and learn from them, and go back to design state and then improve our design. And this is typically known as design, build, test, learn cycle. And it's typically, it is a cyclical process of improving a strain and getting a strain that can make the desired ingredient. And that's why it's a long process, and it's a time-consuming and expensive process to develop the strains for making novel ingredients using precision fermentation. So I wanted to talk in a little more details on some of the steps involved, and I want to discuss pathway design aspect, the very first step, in a little more details, because it kind of highlights how precision fermentation can innovatively solve challenges and can help us make new ingredients. So I want to demonstrate that using an ingredient called trans-2-hexenal, and this is an ingredient that we make at Ardra. Trans-2-hexenal is a simple ingredient. It is used typically as a flavor ingredient in the food industry. If you smell it, it smells like green apple. It's quite ubiquitous, actually. it is produced by almost every single plant. When you mow your lawn, the smell of cut grass, that's contributed by trans-2-hexenal. So it finds applications both in flavors and perfumery. Now, this ingredient is typically extracted from mint, and there are a lot of supply-related challenges with this ingredient. Mint it typically comes from India, and the supply may be unstable. So we wanted to solve the supply-related challenges in trans-2-hexenal. So we decided to work on this ingredient and develop a precision fermentation based pathway for trans-2-hexenal. Now, as I mentioned, most plants make trans-2-hexenal. It's a simple ingredient, and I show the pathway that plants typically use to make trans-2-hexenal. It's a multi-step pathway. It involves breaking down a complex fatty acid to make this small, tiny ingredient. Now, one of the approaches to make trans-2-hexenal would be to borrow the pathway from plants, to get all the enzymes, to get all the genes that are needed for this pathway, add it into an industrial host, and make trans-2-hexenal in a fermenter. But the challenge with this is not the most efficient way to make such a simple molecule. Plants don't care about producing trans-2-hexenal in a very high efficiency, so they don't necessarily use the best pathway or easy pathway to make trans-2-hexenal. So it's probably not the best approach to just emulate nature to make trans-2-hexenal. And even if we do choose to, a lot of plant enzymes don't express very well in industrial microbes. This has been tried before. There are groups that have taken this pathway for trans-2-hexenal, added it in yeast, and the results were not great. They have shown that it can be done, but not necessarily at commercial scale. So if we are to consider this small, simple molecule, and if we are to ask a chemist how they would make it, they would probably come up with a much simpler pathway or much simpler reaction to make trans-2-hexenal. They would start with small precursors, and they would combine these precursors to make trans-2-hexenal. And even though this pathway is not present in nature, this is probably the most efficient way to make trans-2-hexenal. So we thought, why not try to come up with a biochemical pathway that can emulate this chemical synthesis to make trans-2-hexenal. So our goal was to discover enzymes that can catalyze these two-step reactions, which convert butyraldehyde and acetaldehyde into trans-2-hexenal. And we were able to find these enzymes, and butyraldehyde and acetaldehyde can be readily produced in a lot of industrial host strains. So by assembling this simple pathway, completely ignoring how nature makes trans-2-hexenal, we were able to come up with a much more simple and more efficient way to make trans-2-hexenal. And we did not have to rely on any of the plant enzymes. So this kind of demonstrates how we can use precision fermentation and a completely novel approach to make ingredients that much more efficiently and much more sustainably than how they are made in nature. So by using this approach of rational design, we can do a lot of other things. And I give an example of how we can make ingredients much more efficiently than nature. But because we do not rely on natural pathways, we can make ingredients for which natural pathways are not known. Filbertone, for example, is an ingredient that is a flavor for hazelnut. And we know that filbertone gives hazelnut its characteristic flavor, but nobody knows, or at least as far as I know, the pathway for making filbertone was not discovered. So nobody knows how this particular compound is made by hazelnut. So we did not have any natural pathway to emulate, but because we don't rely on natural pathways, or we don't have to use natural pathways, we can come up with a completely new pathway to make these ingredients, such as filbertone, which is a major flavor ingredient. And the only way right now is to produce it or to extract it from natural raw material. We can make it using precision fermentation. we can also make products that are not at all present in nature. For example, this ingredient called R13-butanediol. This is an ingredient that is used in sports nutrition. We can consume it, and our body can convert it into energy. It's a non-sugar, non-protein, non-fat energy source, and it's currently used in sports nutrition to increase endurance. And this ingredient is not made by any plants or any animals, so it's not found in nature. But because we don't rely on natural pathways, we can come up with a pathway to make this ingredient using precision fermentation, using glucose as a starting source. And then we can also make ingredients that are typically extracted from animal sources. Flavors, many fragrances such as musk, they come from animal sources. So we can make ingredients using precision fermentation without having to rely on animal sources. And all four of these ingredients that I give example of, we have been able to demonstrate to make using precision fermentation. So next step in precision fermentation after pathway design is strain engineering. I'll not go into a lot of details into it because strain engineering can be a lecture in itself. But once the pathway has been identified and can be shown to work, the next step is to introduce this pathway in an industrial host strain that can be cultivated in a fermenter to make the target ingredient. Now, host selection, typical hosts that are used in fermentation are bacteria, yeast, and fungi. And a lot goes into selecting a host. There are considerations. There are quite a few considerations. One of them is the type of product. For example, if you want to make an acidic product, bacteria don't like to grow in acidic medium. So, and yeast, yeast do like to grow in acidic medium. So if your product is acidic, maybe you want to use yeast as a host. And there are many other criteria that goes into host selection. We have also seen that once the host is selected, there is also variability within strains. So for example, one of the most common hosts in industry is E. coli, which is a bacteria. And within E. coli, there are different types of E. coli, different strains of E. coli. And it turns out that if you express same pathway in these different strains of E. coli, you get different results. So a lot of host selection, a lot of information and knowledge around this host selection is industry know-how, and industry has their own hosts and engineered preferred host to make specific compounds. But it is a big host selection is a big is it is a it has a big impact on the overall precision fermentation development. Once the host has been selected, the next step is to engineer the metabolism of host strain. After adding the pathway, you want to make sure that the precursors that are needed for the pathway to work, for the ingredient to be produced, can be produced efficiently using the host strains. And the engineering itself is quite a monumental sort of effort, and it takes quite a lot of engineering to make sure that your strain can produce the ingredients or precursors that are needed for ingredients. So most common considerations, and without going into too much details, is to make sure that you're not producing any of the competing products for ingredients. So here I show an example of a simple central carbon metabolism where pyruvate is converted to acetaldehyde, which gets converted into 1,3-butanediol. But pyruvate can also get converted into all these other co-products, but you want to make sure that all your pyruvate goes into making your product, so you would eliminate all the competing products. And then there are considerations such as cofactor balance. So the whole metabolism of your host or cell, which consists of thousands of reactions, is under a fine balance. There are a lot of things, cofactors that cells balance, and if you introduce a new pathway, it can throw off the balance. So you want to make sure that you restore that balance of the cofactors, so that the cells are still happy, physiologically happy, and able to produce the ingredients that you target. And then if you're using more complex host systems such as fungi or yeast, there are issues with compartmentalization. Many of these hosts have organelles, and some of the pathways can be they involve transport of material between these organelles. So you want to make sure that your engineering effort takes into account all that. And finally, just introducing the pathway into host strain, an engineered host strain is also not sufficient. You also have to express and optimize the pathway itself. You cannot just overexpress the pathway and produce or in other words, if you just produce a lot of enzyme, it does not necessarily mean that you're going to produce a lot of your product. You have to actually find a fine balance of what expression level of every single enzyme you need to express so that you can make high quantities of your product. It also matters in our experience how you express the pathway. Are you putting it on a plasmid, or are you integrating the pathway into the genome? We have seen that it gives different results. So as you can see, there are a lot of different interacting factors here that go into strain engineering, and that is what makes the design and developing or constructing a microbial biocatalyst or biocatalyst for precision fermentation very complex. And that's why it almost never goes linearly, and you have to design, build, test, and learn, and go back and design again. So, but if one is able to make a biocatalyst that can produce the desired ingredient, a novel ingredient, even at a proof of concept level, even if it demonstrates that it can make this completely new ingredient, it's an achievement. And the next step is about converting that strain or proof of concept into a real process. And that's where bioprocess optimization starts. And this is where we start characterizing the engineered strain. Typically, it is done in fermenters, and then you have to track a lot of different parameters to develop a process that can efficiently be commercialized. So in fermentation, there are three main I would say KPIs, or key performance indicators, most important ones that are used in the industry. One is yield, which is essentially how much of your substrates get converted into your desired product. It's a very important metric because especially for commodity ingredients, which are produced in very large quantities, the production cost of these commodity ingredients, the raw material, the cost of raw material that goes towards production cost is a major component in producing commodity ingredients. So you want to make sure that maximum of your raw material gets converted into your desired product. So the yield needs to be very high. The second important metric is titer, which is essentially the concentration of your ingredient in your fermentation broth. And this is very important as for ingredients that are high value and need to be produced in high purity. And that's because downstream process to produce ingredients in very high purity, you may need to use a lot of different purification steps. So the higher amount you start with, or higher concentration you start with, more product you can recover at the end. So titer is really, really important for products that are needed in high purity and a high price point. And productivity is the third final metric, which kind of takes into account how much time it takes to make a product. And this is also very important, especially if the ingredients are made at, say, a contract manufacturing facility, where you're paying for the time you're occupying the facility. So the shorter your process, less are your expenses, or lower are your production costs. So these are three most important metrics that one needs to track for precision fermentation process. But overall, there are lots of metrics. We track over 100 KPIs when we develop our fermentation and downstream process. I will not go into details of downstream processing, but I would mention that it is one of the most critical aspects in developing a precision fermentation process, because it has a major impact on the cost. Downstream processing actually have a bigger impact on cost than the fermentation process itself. And once a bioprocess has been developed, let's say at a bench scale or laboratory scale, we start looking into scaling up the process. So there are a lot of considerations. Again, in scale up, it can be a whole lecture on its own. But I will just mention some salient features. One of them I already mentioned: downstream processing becomes all of a sudden very critical at scale up, because it does have a major impact on production cost. And you want to make sure that the downstream process does scale up very well. And the second aspect is, in addition to strain behavior and performance of the strain itself and the pathway itself, one starts to encounter challenges and issues in engineering to that affect the overall performance of the process. Aspects such as mass transfer or heat transfer. Mass transfer especially is important in our experience, where you can grow your cells in very high cell density and in smaller bioreactors, but once you start scaling up the process, you cannot get similar levels of mass transfer, oxygen transfer in large vessels. So it becomes a limitation of how well your process scales up. You also want to make sure that during bench scale or early stage of development, you don't want to rely on very specialized equipments, because during scale up, it becomes challenging if your process needs any specialized equipment, either specialized bioreactors or specialized downstream processing equipment. And then all of a sudden, there are other production-related aspects that come into play during scale-up, such as consistency of raw material, logistics, supplier availability, and transportation. All of these start playing a big role. I will mention that scale-up of ingredients is expensive, so we want to make sure that every single batch that goes into scale up counts and is successful. So we have to take into account all risks, not just technical, but also logistics risk, to make sure the batch is successful. And then typical stages of scale up in the precision fermentation. This is very generic ranges, but after bench scale, which can be very small, 250 ml fermenters to 5-liter fermenters, we go on to laboratory scale scale up, which can be 50 to 100-liter fermenter. Pilot scale typically involves 500 to 5,000-liter fermentation and corresponding downstream process. And then there is demonstration scale, which is a pre-commercial scale at which a process is almost ready, very well scaled up, and it can be demonstrated at 10,000 to 30,000 liter scale. At this stage, typically we can produce the target ingredient and it can use it for formulation trials for some pre-commercial sales. And finally, commercial scale can be anywhere between 50,000 to 200,000 liter fermenter. Just for reference, the picture here shows a 1,000-liter fermenter with our team members. So after the process has been scaled up, one can produce ingredient in large quantities, but there is, of course, one wants to take into account commercialization of the ingredients. So in addition to the technical development, I did want to talk a little bit about what are the commercial considerations in developing an ingredient using precision fermentation. So these are, again, there's not an exhaustive list, but I'm just keeping in mind if there are any aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience and are thinking of making ingredients using precision fermentation. Some of the points you may want to consider is price point of the ingredients. Higher the price point, it is easier, typically lower technical risk, because as you have noticed, there is a lot of R&D and development work goes into making these ingredients. So you may want to pick an ingredient that is higher price point, so the technical and development risk is lower. Market size, again, is very important. Larger the market size, better, because development as well as production using precision fermentation is expensive. So to get return on investment as quickly as possible, to break even as quickly as possible, you want to sell as much product as possible. So a product with a large market size is always desirable. You do have to take into account regulatory roadmap, a lot of ingredients, because precision fermentation affords us to make novel ingredients, completely new ingredients that have never been used before. We have to get regulatory approval. But again, there are ingredients that can be drop-in ingredients that do have history of safe use that can be made using precision fermentation, which have a lower bar for regulatory approval. In my experience, or in my opinion, it's still worthwhile to make novel ingredients, especially from a business point of view, even if you have to get regulatory approval, just because you're not bound by any price expectations from customers. And also, you don't have to worry about replacing the incumbents that may be already selling products that is already in the market. You also want to make sure that there is market need for the ingredient. I mentioned this because a lot of times technologies are developed from academia. They come out of academia, and essentially there is a technology that is developed. It's a very cool technology. And once the technology is developed, product is developed, one goes out and tries to find what applications this product might have, which is a very roundup way, which is the reverse way you want to think of. If you want to start a business, you first want to identify market need, and then develop a solution or come up with a solution to address that need. You do want to take into account technical risks, some of which I mentioned, right from discovery of pathway to strain engineering to scale up. Intellectual property, you want to make sure that nobody else has rights on the similar idea or similar innovation that you have. A lot of times companies do have intellectual property. They may not be practicing it, but they have it out there without actually using it, just to stop others from using or coming up using their innovation to make ingredients. You also want to make sure that the ingredients are scalable. By scalability, I don't mean scale up. By scalability, I mean that the technology or the innovation helps to very quickly expand the business. And a couple of ways to do this is to make ingredients that have applications in different markets. So once you enter a particular market, let's say food or nutrition, you may want to try and sell the same ingredient in a different sector, such as cosmetics, so that you don't have to take that technical risk of development again, and where you can quickly expand the market. Or one can develop a families of pathway or family of ingredient, where once you have scaled up and commercialized one ingredient, you can very quickly use the same innovation to make a related ingredient that can be brought to market very quickly. And then finally, impact. Just in addition to just the economics and profits, potential profits from a product, you may also want to consider the impact the product makes. In my experience, I've seen the team that works on development. You will need a team. One needs a whole team to develop precision fermentation technology. And in my experience, I have seen that team is much more motivated if the target ingredient has some sort of an environmental or social impact beyond just profits for the company. So these are the points that I would consider in picking a product ingredient for precision fermentation. I do want to mention pricing and markets. As I mentioned, high price point and large market is an excellent combination, an ideal target for precision fermentation. If you can find such ingredients, they make a very good business case. Typically, ingredients can be classified in 3 different categories broadly. This is not a formal classification, but it's easy to understand. There are fine ingredients, fine chemicals that have very high price point, but tend to have a smaller market. In flavor and fragrance industry, you can find ingredients that are as high as $50,000 per kg, but they have small market. They may have a market requirement of 100 kilograms a year, for example. So that translates into a $5 million market. It's not a big market. And then there are ingredients that have huge market, commodities, like palm oil, $65 billion market, but the price point can be very low. And that makes it a more technically challenging technology to develop. You want to reach very large production scales to meet the economies of scale. So commodity chemicals on the other spectrum. Then there is a middle ground, which are known as specialty ingredients or specialty chemicals. And these ingredients tend to have decent price points, not very high, and decent size markets. And this is typically the area where a lot of precision fermentation companies operate. Specialty ingredients with decent price points, fairly large markets. But if you can find an ingredient that has price point of a fine chemical and market of a commodity chemical, those are the best ingredients to go after in precision fermentation. Typically, precision fermentation companies use business model that involves toll manufacturing. So ingredients are manufactured not at their own facilities, but at toll manufacturing facilities. Building precision fermentation capacity can be very expensive. It can be tens of millions of dollars, if not over 100 million. And very few precision fermentation companies, which tend to be startups, have that kind of capital to invest. So they typically rely on what are known as contract manufacturing facilities or toll manufacturing facilities to make the ingredients. It saves the capex, it's capital expenditure, and also this is the fastest way to market. So you don't have to rely on building a facility and the delays that come with it, the delays that are involved with it, and the risks that are involved with it. You kind of take that aspect of business risk out of the picture. Typical precision fermentation companies are B2B companies. They sell ingredients to ingredient houses or consumer packaged good companies, food companies. So the sales happen through what we call as long-term supply agreements. So you typically precision fermentation companies won't make a huge inventory until they have a customer already closed. So you would first get a purchase agreement from a customer, and then you would go out and make the ingredient. And then the sales cycles are typically very long, because especially if you're making a novel ingredient, you want to make sure that you have a customer for that ingredient. They are comfortable using this novel ingredient. And that's why you may want to engage with customers very early on. So these are some of the aspects in coming up with a business model for precision fermentation companies. Nowadays, I'm looking more of new business models, such as D2C business model, direct to consumer business model, where a lot of precision fermentation companies, instead of trying to sell their ingredients to large CPG companies, they tend to make their own consumer products and try to sell those products directly to consumers. Financing is a precision fermentation company is nowadays is more of a challenge than it was a few years ago. Precision fermentation development is expensive. I show here a graph of some of the precision fermentation companies that have raised funding or financing in last few years. As you can see, most of the companies have raised tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, and these are the companies that that were making mainly food ingredients. The most common way of financing a precision fermentation is through venture capital funding. But one also needs to understand that venture capital funding necessitates a large market size, scalability of the business, and speed with which a return on investment can be generated. Some of the aspects that I mentioned, you may want to consider if one wants to enter precision fermentation business. VC funding also does not necessarily align very well with capital expenditure. They don't want to lock up their funds in a facility. So so many times there may not be a perfect alignment between precision fermentation and venture capital funding, as a lot of companies are discovering, as well as VC firms are discovering. So I see nowadays there are new mechanisms of funding, of commercialization of ingredients are being explored, both in terms of how to produce this ingredient and how to fund a business related to precision fermentation. So I can keep on going. It's a very interesting topic for me, both commercialization as technology. But I'm being told that you all have only 1 hour for me, so I'm going to summarize my talk. And if I want to just summarize some of the take-home messages that I would love for you all to remember, if anything, from my talk today. The most important one, the first one, is that natural food ingredients may not be necessarily better for environment. We may think that natural ingredients are good for health and good for environment, but they may not be, which is a little counterintuitive. Precision fermentation, if your goal was to understand what precision fermentation is or what it involves, a simple definition of precision fermentation is fermentation processes where microbial hosts are used as cell factories to produce specific ingredients. These are different from traditional fermentations that are used in the food industry. Development process of precision fermentation is long, and it's never linear. It always involves design, build, test, learn cycles, and that's why it takes long time and a lot of funding to develop a precision fermentation process. The best ingredients to make using precision fermentations are the ones that have high price point and large markets. If you can find those, they are the ones to go after. And finally, there are new precision fermentation requires new way of thinking about how to build businesses around precision fermentation and how to fund precision fermentation towards a commercial success, which is what I see nowadays a lot of precision fermentation companies are trying to do. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk. I want to thank the University of Toronto to invite me to this talk, and I want to thank my team for all the work they have been done so far, and given me the opportunity to share all their hard work with all great audiences. Thank you.
Before we close, I just want to thank you, Dr. Gawand, for being with us today and sharing your insights and your success. Thanks for an engaging presentation on the future of sustainable food innovation, highlighting your groundbreaking work in precision fermentation and its potential to revolutionize ingredient production. To everyone who joined us here today, we invite you to share your feedback on the Skule Lunch and Learn series. A link to our online survey is being made available in the chat and will be shared with you all after this event. A link to the presentation will also be shared with all registered guests in the upcoming weeks. Skule Lunch and Learn events are traditionally hosted on the second Wednesday of each month. Our next Lunch and Learn event will be in the new year and features Professor Steve Waslander on Wednesday, January 15th. Professor Waslander will showcase his groundbreaking research on equipping autonomous vehicles to tackle adverse weather by advancing perception, self-awareness, and smarter decision-making. So just in time for the bad weather coming. In closing, I would like to thank all of you for joining us for today's presentation and hereby adjourn today's session of Skule Lunch and Learn. Sending warm thoughts and best wishes to you all for a wonderful holiday season and a happy new year. Take care. Bye-bye.